The moment the airport security officer's hand shoved John Kennedy toward the gate, a collective gasp rippled through the bustling terminal. Passengers froze mid-step, their eyes wide with shock as the elderly man stumbled, his cane clattering to the polished floor. His gray hair was disheveled, his leather jacket creased from the rough handling, and his glasses hung crookedly on his weathered face. The officer, a stern woman with a badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, shouted, "You're out of here, old man. No more delays." The crowd murmured, some pulling out their phones to record, but no one dared intervene. John, however, remained eerily calm, his deep blue eyes steady as he straightened himself, picked up his cane, and uttered a single word that would turn the tide of this humiliating encounter: enough. John Kennedy wasn't just any traveler. At 78, he had lived a life marked by quiet resilience, shaped by decades of service as a pilot during turbulent times. His career had taken him across continents, navigating storms and wars, but now, in his retirement, he was reduced to this: a man accused of causing a scene at the check-in counter over a delayed flight. The trouble began when he politely asked for assistance with his luggage, his arthritis making it impossible to lift the heavy bag himself. The staff, overwhelmed by a sudden influx of frustrated passengers, dismissed him with curt replies. When he pressed further, citing his veteran status and need for accommodation, the situation escalated. The security officer, already on edge from a long shift, saw his persistence as defiance and decided to escort him out, assuming he was just another cranky elderly passenger. As John stood there, regaining his composure, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He thought of his late wife, Margaret, who had always been his rock, cheering him on through every flight and every hardship. She had passed 2 years ago, leaving him with memories and a promise to keep living fully. This trip was meant to honor her, a pilgrimage to the small coastal town where they'd honeymooned, a place he hadn't visited since her death. The humiliation stung, but it was the indifference in the officer's eyes that cut deepest. He leaned on his cane, his voice low but firm as he repeated, "Enough." The word carried the weight of a lifetime, a command born from authority and pain. The officer, whose name tag read, Lt. Ramirez, faltered. She was in her early 30s, a single mother who had joined the airport security force to provide for her young son, Miguel. Her tough exterior was a shield against the chaos of her job, but John's word pierced through it. She opened her mouth to retort, but the crowd's growing murmurs and the sight of John's trembling hands stopped her. A young passenger, a college student named Aisha, stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "Hey, he's not doing anything wrong. He just needs help." Others joined in, their voices a chorus of support, and the tension shifted. Lieutenant Ramirez's face flushed with a mix of anger and uncertainty as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. John seized the moment, his voice gaining strength. "I've flown planes through hurricanes, saved lives in the air, and now I can't get a little respect on the ground." His words hung in the air, drawing tears from Aisha and nods from a few older passengers who recognized the veteran's pride. Lieutenant Ramirez's resolve cracked as she recalled her own father, a retired soldier who had struggled with similar indignities in his final years. Guilt washed over her, she had misjudged John, seeing only a problem instead of a person. She lowered her hand, her voice softening. "Sir, I'm sorry. Let's figure this out." What followed was a tense but transformative exchange. Lieutenant Ramirez escorted John to a quieter area, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. She listened as he shared snippets of his life, how he'd met Margaret during a layover, how she'd nursed him through a crash landing injury, and how this trip was his way of saying goodbye. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the depth of his loss mirrored her own fears of losing her father. She called for assistance, and soon a supervisor arrived, offering John a wheelchair and a priority boarding pass. The resolution wasn't just logistical, it was emotional. Lieutenant Ramirez personally helped him with his bag, her apology sincere as she said, "I should have seen you, not just the delay." The flight delay stretched on, giving John and Lieutenant Ramirez time to talk. Aisha, the student, joined them, bringing coffee and a kind ear. She was on her way to visit her grandmother, who had taught her the value of compassion, lessons she now applied here. Together, they formed an unlikely trio, sharing stories that bridged their generations. John spoke of courage under pressure. "Lieutenant Ramirez of the sacrifices of single parenthood, and Aisha of finding purpose in a chaotic world. The airport staff, witnessing this, began to soften, offering small gestures of kindness, a blanket, a meal voucher, turning the terminal into a space of unexpected community. When the flight was finally called, John stood with a renewed sense of dignity. Lieutenant. Ramirez wheeled him to the gate, and Aisha walked beside them, promising to check in on him during the flight. As he boarded, he turned to Lieutenant Ramirez and said, "Thank you. One word can change everything." She nodded, her eyes glistening, knowing she'd learned a lesson in empathy that would shape her future interactions. The plane took off, carrying John toward his destination, but also carrying a ripple of change back to the airport. Back on the ground, Lieutenant Ramirez returned to her post with a new perspective. She initiated a training session for her team, emphasizing the need to see the human behind every passenger. Aisha, inspired, started a blog about their encounter, calling it One-Word Journeys, which went viral, spreading a message of kindness. And John, reaching the coastal town, scattered Margaret's ashes with a smile, feeling her presence in the support he'd found. The story ended with a powerful message. One word, spoken with heart, can break barriers, heal wounds, and inspire a movement of compassion that transforms lives.